Hello and welcome to Upper Pen. My name is Dakota, and today I am talking with Kim Conrey about her book, Stealing Aries. So thank you, Kim, for joining me.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm delighted to talk to you.
For everybody who hasn't yet read Stealing Aries, what's it about?
Well, it's set 500 years in our future where Mars has been colonized, but the caldera under Yellowstone National Park has gone up and ash is circling the Earth. And so they can't get supplies to the colonists. And the grandest starship of all time, the Ares, has gone silent when the colonists need her most. And no one can figure out why this beautiful starship that could actually save them because it could transport supplies, people, the resources they need back and forth, it's just gone dormant. It won't come back online. And so when my strong, beautiful female protagonist, Harlow Hansen, sneaks on board to strip the gold wiring off of the ship because the darn thing's not running anyway, it wakes up and begins talking to her. And the prince of the UK, who has fled to the Mars colony to solve the mystery of the sleeping ship after the attempted assassination of his entire family, but it succeeded in killing his young wife and child, has fled there to figure out the mystery of the ship, and he's thrown himself into it. And the last 7 years of his life, she Harlow walks on board and is going to steal from it, but then it wakes up and starts speaking to her, and he realizes the woman stealing from him is the key that he's been searching for.
So, one, the book is great, and I love all of the backstory for each of the characters, but I really love your world building too. It's one of my favorite parts.
I appreciate that.
So I love that the colonists are facing a real problem because they can't get materials from Earth because of a natural disaster on Earth and Earth fighting within its own governments, really.
Yeah, and when I originally wrote that, it was a pandemic that stranded them there, and I had written this 3, 4 years before COVID. I had always been fascinated with the 1918 flu pandemic, and I had read books about it. I was just fascinated by it. And when I went to start querying Stealing Aries to agents and editors, by the time I was ready to query the book, they were saying no pandemic stories. They were getting inundated with people who had written about the pandemic, had written the pandemic into stories. And here I am with the book that the premise is that a pandemic has swept the earth. And I just wanted to scream, I wrote this before COVID. I swear I did. But to them, they just didn't want to hear it. And when you send out a query letter, there are so many things because they get hundreds of query letters for great stories landing in their inbox every week. Anything that they don't want is an automatic reason for them to just delete and move on. They read one sentence or two, delete and move on if there's anything, that they don't like or that they said they didn't want to see. And so for like a year or more, I put the book in a drawer because I thought, this disaster is so woven into this story. What else am I going to do? And I was just so exhausted at the time. And this was the fifth book I had written. And I had been going to conferences and querying for years. And I thought, I'm just too exhausted to fool with it. And I'm part of a writing group called the Wild Women Who Write. And we were doing a podcast that night. And Kathy, one of the wild women, said, Hey, I know, for the podcast, let's all answer questions as our protagonist. And at the time, the book I was concentrating on was a memoir that I had written with my oldest child about harm OCD. which is a form of OCD where you have intrusive thoughts about hurting yourself or someone else, and not violent people at all. These are just looping intrusive thoughts. So when Kathy mentioned this exercise, I thought, well, I can't answer as the protagonist from my book because, that's me, that's my child, So I thought, well, I'll answer as Harlow. And when she asked these questions to each of the wild women in the group, and I was answering as Harlow, I thought, I miss her. I miss this character. I miss the world I built around this character. And I also thought to myself, Kim, my gosh, this is a story about a strong woman fighting for what she loves and what she believes in. And you're going to put this book in a drawer. You are a strong woman fighting for what you love and believe in. My gosh, you can do this. And so that's when the caldera went up. And I found my new disaster to strand the colonists on Mars. Because I also find it fascinating that Yellowstone Park sits on top of a caldera. That's why they have the geysers. But when I talk to these people about the book, when I'm out somewhere, a lot of them say, that's a what now? They don't, like, some people just don't realize that the geysers in Yellowstone National Park are the result of that whole park sitting on top of a caldera that has blown before and will at some point in the future blow again.
That is, I love that this writing group and like inhabiting Harlow for, a night or a podcast really like sunk you into doing this again.
Yeah, it lit a fire under me, and it made me just realize how much I love this story. And I think if you want readers to love this story and feel passionate about it, you as a writer have to love it and feel passionate about it. And I do. And one of the things I love most about her is, she grew up with a speech and language disorder, and that affected who she became, who she is. And this isn't, people have this misunderstanding about romances that it's all bodice ripping and body talk and bedroom scenes. And that frustrates me because it's so much more than that. What I write is so much more than that. And what a lot of other romance writers are writing, especially these days, are so much more than that. So I would encourage people who maybe haven't read a romance since they found their mother's old Harlequin under the bed or whatever to give it another shot, because there's some depth out there in what people are writing these days. And I wanted to include neurodiversity and age positivity, like with Mother Superior. This is a nun who she cusses. She will come after you if you hurt somebody she loves. And I just wanted this book to have all those elements and be more something I could love, something other people could feel passionate about too.
The characters are very well rounded too. So Harlow has this speech impediment that is a result of like tampering with her brain, essentially. But she doesn't know that growing up. And so she's just like, people treated me so differently as soon as I couldn't talk to them. Um, and
And
that
that's so real for
yeah.
a lot of kids. And there's someone in my family who struggles with mild mixed expressive receptive speech and language disorder. And because it's a processing disorder and you may be talking to someone and it takes them longer to answer you, a teacher, for example, might think, stop daydreaming, or you're not paying attention to me. When that's not the case, it just takes their brain longer to process what you're saying and longer to answer you if it's both aggressive and receptive. And this also might be the case with children and adults even who have apraxia of speech, which is something that you can be born with. And by the way, you can also get something like mixed expressive receptive speech and language disorder from a blow to the head, a car accident, a stroke. So it was so important to me to have this in the story. And I think we need more things like that, and more things like the King's Speech,
Yeah.
where we see people represented with that.
it's just it was just really nice because you wove it into the plot too. So it wasn't just some throwaway comment that, oh yeah, at one point she did have this speech impediment, but she grew out of it and now she's just perfect, right? No, she still stumbles sometimes when she can't get, like when she's thinking too fast or when she's trying to come up with
Right.
lies.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. When
So
she's stressed out, exhausted. Yeah, it can get worse. And a lot of people don't know female wrestler Ronda Rousey has apraxia of speech, if you know who that is,
yeah.
by family member who has uh, MERL, the mixed expressive receptive speech and language disorder. Their therapist told me that Ronda Rousey has the apraxia of speech. And they said, well, if you pay attention sometimes when she's giving an interview or whatever, you can see that she enunciates well and will slow down. And yeah.
Well, I just really love her, but I also love Jack because he is like the tortured soul, right? He's had this tragic past and he just wants something, anything to work right. And the thing he's focusing on is this ship. And he's been at it for 7 years and nobody believes in it. And people are trying to dismantle it.
Yeah.
Poor guy.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that was a reflection also of the writing journey, because you every once in a while will have a writer that will send out one query letter or go to one conference and meet with an agent or an editor from a publishing house, and success, they're signed and they have a book contract. But for most of us, that is not the case. For most of us, it's years of querying agents and it's stacks of rejection letters. And I think Jack's struggle to get that ship online, and the conversation that he has with Carlos Gonzalez and saying, to Harlow, I believe in Jack because Jack stayed with it. And it's hard when you're trying to believe in something for years and years and you don't see it come through. And that was why he followed Jack. And I think there's something to the strength that you gain when you're waiting on something and you have to keep believing in it when there's not a lot of evidence for you to keep holding on. And as far as writers go, I don't think that just makes us better writers. It makes us better people. And the time we spend taking in rejection and getting stronger and keeping our mouth shut when we hear the rejection and going, okay, I'm just going to take this in and I'm going to ask myself, could what they're suggesting to me be true? Do I need to go revise? Man, that's an exercise in spirit. That's an exercise in becoming just a better person. And when I look back on it, I think a lot of how I wrote Jack trying to get that ship online when there was no reason to keep trying. I think a lot of that was the writer's journey in me.
It's nice that he has people though, like Carlos and the other woman, guard. I can't remember her name right now. But they're both like, that we stayed with you on purpose. It wasn't just because we were stranded here, right?
Yes, Evelyn and Sarah
Yes, there we
and
go.
the
Yeah.
ship's captain. Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
Yes.
exactly. AVM Miller, Air Vice Marshal Miller. Yeah. They believe in him. They want to follow him. Yeah.
Well, the air marshal too, that was her home. Like that seemed to be most of her career. And how do you let that go? Just seems so hard.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And she kept believing and she just stayed there, and they believed in him. And it was a beautiful thing. And it was a found family where all they had was each other, and they wanted better, but it was enough at the same time.
So I love that I love these main core of characters. So there's Harlow, Jack, Mother Superior, Carlos. Um, and then there is Harlow's mom, who is difficult. And I feel like this is every mother-daughter relationship,
Yeah.
just maybe to the nth degree. Um,
Yeah.
so how did you keep her in there being so quite negative, and not change her? Because I feel like a lot of people have this urge to make everything kind of happy or like rosy, but not everybody is that type of person.
Right. And she's a hard person.
Yeah.
And I think she felt like she had to be. And her arc is going to continue throughout all the books to come. And I wanted to have at least a couple of characters that you really had to hang in there through the series. Just like their development would be slower, and it would take a while for them to get where we want what we truly want for them, where we would like to see them. And she's going to be slower, but I wanted there to be that person that just life has just jaded them to the point that you just feel like you can't reach them, and they're hurting the people around them. And what do we do with people like that? I really like to look at what we do there, because there's a choice, right? We can try to understand that person, but most of the time they just make us mad as hell. But there's also something there for us if we can sort of tap the brakes and try to say, but why? Why are they there? That's why I liked giving a lot of the backstory about how she left her career and she came there because she had found the love of her life. But then, well, I don't give away too many spoilers, but then he's gone, and it's hard. But I think we still stay mad at her, but we understand her a little better.
I think it's the lack of communication, which is really the problem. It's never really that she's upset or angry. She's making unilateral decisions for everybody around her, and then not explaining.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of it. And isn't that the problem in a lot of stories and even in our lives, is not so much that they can't be understood, but that they're this wall, and we just want to grab them and get through there, and we just feel like we can't, and maybe we never do. Some people even die that way. But I think it's a good study in even the people around us. Yeah.
Well, I'm excited for her arc. So, I'm hoping she and Carlos stay in it for a long time.
I will.
Good. um, so the structure of the book in my mind is kind of like part one and then part two, because there's this big kind of turning point in the middle where Harlow makes a decision, again, without telling anybody. She thinks she's doing what's best for everyone, and everything just goes to shit. So how did you keep it from being two separate books instead of just like, oh, here's the point, she's made the decision? Like, why keep it in one book?
Right. And I've often wondered if I'd had a publisher who was, say, a little more controlling, because the publisher I have for this book is, one of their mission statements is to keep the voice of the author authentic and to not mess with the story. It's yours. And so I've often wondered if they would have asked me to make this two books or whatever. But I just felt like I wanted that really, really harsh turning point there, because when I think about the books that have stuck with me, that have just drilled down into my heart and soul, they're books that had a hard pivot like that just made me go, no. And I wanted that. Yeah.
I think those are really the best books, is when you have this really unexpected pivot. So I was not expecting the book to go in that direction. And I was like, wow, okay. I thought you were going to get the ship online and go to war or something, but no, so much worse. So good job with a nice twist.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear it.
It can be hard to maintain those types of twists too in books and make it feel cohesive. But I
Right.
think what does it for this one for me is Harlow and Jack's relationship and like um, bridging the gap between the sections is really reflection on their relationship. And I loved that. I loved that it kept going and it didn't like stagnate.
Good. Good deal. I'm glad it worked.
Um, so there is a couple of bad guys in the books. There's, well, a lot of bad guys in the books. So uh, when you're choosing the kind of like, what are they? My brain just died. Like the turncoats. What is it that the people who betray them? Okay,
Yeah.
we'll
Our
go with that.
villains,
The villains, yes.
baddies.
So you chose a character who was kind of a side character at the beginning, right? He's very tangentially touched on. And then out of nowhere, he's evil. And it was such a good reveal.
Oh, nice. Thank you.
So how did you choose who was going to be evil or who was going to be the villain, the main villain, I guess?
I liked the idea of it being someone that you wouldn't quite expect. But then when you get there, it kind of makes sense that there would be this plant. I think it was Toni Morrison that said the turns in the story should be, or the conclusions or the twist should be both unexpected yet inevitable.
Yeah.
And I'm probably saying it just slightly wrong, but you don't expect it, but then when you think about it, yeah, yeah, that's the only way it could have happened, because I think on a starship like that, it makes sense that he would have been there and he would have been the villain without giving too much away.
I definitely thought it was going to be someone else. Spoiler alert. Small spoiler alert. I thought it was going to be the doctor because he was so
Oh,
into like, yes, let's try this experimental science thing. Get in this chair.
let's tinker with your head now. Come along.
Right. And then it's someone else. And I was like, no, that definitely makes sense. And then I still don't know how I felt about the doctor by the end. I was like, do I trust you fully? I don't know.
We should we?
um, so what drew you to sci-fi romance?
Okay. I love this question. I was originally a physics major until the math made me cry. I had spent so much time reading a lot of the Fred Allen Wolf and Paul Davies, and nowadays I like to read Michio Kaku and folks like this. I love theoretical physics and astrophysics, and I just love all that. Anything that bakes my brain just a little bit when I read it, like parallel universes, wormholes, any of that. It just fascinates me to no end. But the math was just more than I wanted to. And so when I was in college, what my professors did say was, if you ever wanted to be an English major, you can write. They would make nice comments about my writing and this kind of thing. Or when we were doing group projects, they would say, Kim, please go over here and help these fellas over here with this paper. They really need help with their writing. And so eventually I thought, I can love all these theoretical concepts, theoretical physics, sci-fi. I can write about it and I can love it for the rest of my life and never sit through another math class. And so that's what I did. And and all the science, so in my books, I pride myself on them being at least theoretically possible. So anything you read about, I've at least looked it up and it's theoretically possible. There's a peer-reviewed paper somewhere where someone has put the theory forth and researched it. So yeah, and that's why sci-fi. But I also love romance. And the reason why I love romance so much is these are basically tales of resurrection, right? It's an archetype. Like any romance story is this sort of archetype of resurrection. You know, someone has fallen asleep in a sense, like when Jack arrives on the colonies, he's numb. He's had this tragedy, he's grieving. He doesn't think he can ever feel again. So he dives into trying to wake this dormant ship. And so he's asleep, dead in a sense. And resurrection happens when he meets this woman. He doesn't expect it, he doesn't see it coming, but it awakens something inside him. So very far from romance being these sort of dime store, oh, it's just bodice ripping and whatever. No, this is at the heart of what we're all looking for. And I don't even just mean romance. These cyclical tales of resurrection that occur in our lives, we can be awoken from, you know, we might have fallen asleep in our career. We might be out walking our dog one day and have this epiphany. I'm unhappy. And that doesn't just apply to relationships. It can apply to whatever area in our life where we've fallen asleep. The romance tale is an archetype, if you will, of resurrection. And it points us towards what it means to awaken in our lives. And there's a depth to that people miss. And so it makes me a little crazy when people just sort of dismiss romance offhand. And I say, no, it's what you're looking for in any level of your life. When you need to wake up and notice something that you didn't see there before and feel passionate about that. And it doesn't even have to be a new relationship. If we're talking relationships, you could even notice the person that you've been with for 20 years and suddenly see them in a new light. You know, and that's resurrection too. That's my take on it.
I love that idea. And now that you've actually put it into words, I think that's kind of what draws me to romance is like usually someone is jaded or they've had a lot go on and they just are not themselves anymore. And somebody helps them. Somebody brings them back out, right? Resurrects
Yeah.
them in your words. So yeah,
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah. It's very cyclical, you know. It happens in our lives on a loop. We find that we've fallen asleep and we're depressed or we're unhappy and we don't quite know why. Yeah, it's a tale of resurrection and, you know, the sleeping beauty sort of formula,
Yeah.
you know, it works for a reason. You know, I would argue sometimes, you know, Snow White could have kissed the prince and woke him up. It doesn't always have to be that, you know, the other way around, but yeah, there's a reason why it works. There's a reason why it's lasted.
And I feel like that might be the reason why romance is particularly attractive to people who are a little bit older, like in their late 20s and going on in life, right? They've had a little bit of experience now, and like maybe the humdrum of an everyday job is kind of getting to them. And like these books are hopeful, these stories of like romance and yeah.
Yes, yeah. That the happily ever after or the happily for now. There's a
Yeah.
reason why that appeals, and I think some people might say, well, everything's not all pie in the sky, or you know that kind of thing, or they think you're trying to just walk around not seeing reality. when actually, I think, like you're saying, the reason why they want to read that is because they've had so much reality wash over them recently that, my gosh, they just need to read something hopeful, and that's okay, and that's good. And it gives them hope in their own life, like you were saying. Yeah.
Also, to the people who say that like it's like happily ever afters don't exist, right? Everybody knows that this is not the end of the story. This is the
Oh,
beginning
no.
of their story, usually.
Yes, yes, exactly. Yeah. And in book two, Losing Aries, let's see here. Things actually get quite tough. They get actually a lot tougher, I would say. That one focuses more on Carlos and Sophia, two of the side characters.
Oh, I'm down with this.
Carlos is so sweet.
I love that he just sits with Harlow at one point and just lets her cry because she's not allowed, like, she's supposed to be tough. Her mom taught her to be tough and not cry, not really mourn. But Carlos is like, no, it's just us. Go ahead. I'll cry
Yeah,
with you.
yeah. And he's such a true friend and
Yeah.
just such a beautiful, sweet person that I wanted to give him his story. And an interesting thing about him is when I started writing him, the name Carlos Gonzalez just came to my head. And the more I wrote him, the more I loved him. And I thought, this is just a sweet man, but a tough man too. This is hardcore Marine, but he can be so kind and just such a beautiful, loyal friend and person. So I don't know what caused me to do it, but I Googled the name and I thought, I just want to see, what comes up. And my jaw dropped. And I should have known there was something to it because naming is very important to me. Like, names, I feel like should mean something. Not that every character I write has a name that's necessarily meaningful, but I like to do that. And when I looked him up, there was a Carlos Gonzalez that when he was 19 and they were laying communications line and the Japanese were dropping grenades on their position and everything. A grenade rolled up to him and the few other Marines that were around him. And at 19, the actual Carlos Gonzalez threw himself on the grenade and died and saved everybody around him. And there was a base in Okinawa, I believe it was. It's a jungle warfare school that carried his name. I had no idea because I named the character first. And so I wove that into the story just to honor him and his
Yeah.
memory. I wove a little bit of that into the story. I don't know if you remember, but he tells that story when he and Harlow, well, actually, when you're talking about when he gives her this opportunity to cry and say, I lost my father, he tells her the story about I believe he says it's his great uncle who was a Marine that, or would have been further back than that, would be his ancestor. But yeah. I made it his relative, basically.
It's sweet. And tragic. Very tragic.
Yeah, yeah.
So did you find that it was nice working with a smaller press for publishing this? Because you said they gave you a lot of freedom.
They did, yes. And that's what I loved about it because I'm on the board of the Atlanta Writers Club. I'm the VP of operations, and my husband is the executive director, and he does writers conferences twice a year and has been doing that for years. And so we know a lot of authors that have been published with large publishing houses, mid-sized, small, self-published. And a lot of them have told us that the editors at the publishing houses, I mean, this isn't always the case, but quite a few of them have said, yeah, I felt like when I got the manuscript back, it was edited so much that I lost a lot of my voice in it, and I had to lose some characters I didn't want to lose. And so I was glad that I didn't have to deal with that. And maybe there are parts of the manuscript that might have been better because of it. But ultimately, I'm glad I got to keep what I got to keep. Yeah.
I'm glad that you got to keep it the way it is because it feels like I don't know, it feels like a really good complete story. And I know that there's the second one and hopefully more than that.
Yes, there will be.
But there are challenges that come with small presses, like getting the book widely recognized, right? Um, so how do you deal with that, I guess?
Yeah, that can be tough. And I will say Black Rose hustles. They're good about getting applying for book clubs and trying to get little spots in little magazines and things like that and getting the word out. And they have a large mailing list of their own, and they really hustle for small press because I've talked to people who are with small, medium size. I've even talked to people who are with the big five who have said they signed a contract and then their publisher did almost nothing to promote their book. And Black Rose really hustles. I gotta hand it to them. Yeah.
So I actually met you at Dragon Con, which is like a big convention down in Atlanta for like
Yes.
uh it's like a Comic-Con, I guess, on the East Coast. Um and that seemed like a wonderful way to get like new people to see the book. So does that help, do you think, being at those types of things?
I think it does because I met you and you're lovely.
Well,
And I
thank
found
you.
out about your podcast and I was riding around in my car listening to it. And it's so good. And it's just neat that I get to connect with readers and introduce more people to the book. And yeah, I definitely think it helps, especially if you write in a sci-fi or fantasy genre, because my husband is a writer as well, and he has historical fiction that has like sort of a literary fiction bent to it, and he has some thrillers and mysteries. And he just recently wrote a sci-fi comedy, but for the most part, his books are, you know, more literary or mystery or, whatever. And so we'll be selling together at a bookstore, and his books will outsell mine because that's more, and it also depends on where we are too. But that flips when we're somewhere like Dragon Con,
Yeah.
at any kind of con where people are more into sci-fi and fantasy. So it felt good to be somewhere where I was actually, you know, selling. But yeah, it can be a lot better at the cons where people are into that. That's their fandom, man. That is their thing. They love it. They can't wait. They're in their element. Yes.
I always feel like it's really hard to find sci-fi romance in particular. So it feels like those books they're written, they're just, I can't find them sometimes and get frustrated. So I have to go to like sci-fi romance Reddit, right? And like be like, please tell me what's out there.
Right. And it depends on what you're looking for too. Recently, and I don't know if this is starting to die down a little bit now. I think it might be, but there was everything was alien men, but not just alien men, but a very specific kind of shirtless alien men. And that's great if that's what you like. But if you're looking for something that's a little more, say, ensemble cast, which is what I write. I love ensemble cast. I loved the old Firefly,
Yeah.
where you have the ship and you have the certain characters that are always there and they get to be like family. I love that. So if you're looking for that kind of thing, that is even harder to find. And Jessie Mahalik writes like that. She has the ensemble cast, so I love that. But yeah, especially if you're looking for a specific type of sci-fi romance, it can be tough.
And I feel like it shouldn't be this difficult because they're so good. And if people would just read them more or
Thank you.
actually
Yes, I
talk
agree.
about them.
I agree wholeheartedly.
I love Jessie Mahalik too because she does book recommendations on her website. So I will often go there and be like, "What you reading? Let me see
Yes.
what's going on." So it's helpful to know what people like the people I read, what they're reading. So
Right. Yeah, exactly.
other than Jessie Mahalik, who do you like?
I also like Susan Grant. Have you read any of hers?
No.
She writes really, and she's been around for a while,
Okay.
and she writes really good sci-fi romance. And she was a pilot. She was actually in the military and was a pilot. So a lot of stuff she writes, well, kind of in the same way that Jessie Mahalik has, like, she's got computer science degree, right?
Yeah.
Has that sort of expertise. Susan Grant has the expertise of being a pilot, and she weaves that into her books. So that's some great sci-fi romance. And of course, the mother of sci-fi romance, Lene Sinclair, her books are really good, and she's been around for a while. She's
Okay.
really nice. I remember I emailed her, and her and Susan both. I had emailed them, talking to them and asking them some things, and they were open to like receiving emails from me and chatting. And who else? Let's see, Susan Grant, Lene Sinclair, of course, Jessie. I'm trying to think who's on my bookshelf back here. What have I got? Yeah, a lot of Jessie back here.
Oh, yeah, I do too. Um, but thank you. That helps. I love hearing writers that I haven't heard of, even if they are bigger names. Sometimes they just get lost in the fray, right?
They really do. Yes, and Cherlin Kenyon,
Okay.
and Kara Bristol. She's been around for a long time. Yeah, yeah.
So when does book two come out? Stealing or Losing Aries?
October 12th.
October. Ooh, that's close. Are there audiobook versions of these?
Stealing Aries is coming out on audiobook. My publisher said any day now, actually.
Ooh, that should help. I always love audiobooks, so I'll probably pick up the audiobook of both.
Good. Love that.
Are you working on anything else?
Yes, I have Nicholas Eternal, my urban fantasy. This fella. And that sort of came from my time as a CASA representative. It's CASA stands for Court Appointed Special Advocates. It's children's advocacy, where when a child is taken into foster care, the volunteer is taught to advocate for the needs of the child. And they teach you how to talk to the bio parents, the foster parents, the child. If they're seeing a therapist, maybe you talk to them. You just talk to a lot of different people. And then you compile a report for the judge and family court. And it just simply gives the judge another, point of view that's not steeped in legalese or anything like that. And because of that, and because of some things I had gone through as a child, I felt this sort of burden for children, this need to help, but it felt like it was never enough. And so Nicholas, this idea of Nicholas, and he is, spoiler alert, Saint Nick. This is actually the Saint. He's an eternal being, but he's based on he is the actual Saint Nick, who was originally sainted for buying children out of slavery. And he gave everything that he owned. And when he had nothing left, he gave himself. And so I thought, what if that never ended? What if he was still alive and still doing that? That would wear you down so much. I think the idea of someone having, these powers to save people, it sounds so great, but I think it would actually be really hard and it would probably mess you up. And so when the story opens, he's this savior who's in desperate need of saving because hundreds and hundreds of years of doing this and sometimes failing and rescuing children from the worst of society has hurt him. And so when the story opens, he's having a tough time with his calling. And it's set in Atlanta and it's urban fantasy. And I'm also releasing a memoir. That's November 2nd that I wrote with my oldest child. They're 21 now. And it's about harm OCD and our struggle to find appropriate help, because that can be tough, because there's a lot of misunderstanding about what obsessive compulsive disorder is. And especially when it's kind of the punchline of a joke for a lot of people. They'll say, "Oh, you're so OCD if you like to keep your house neat or whatever." And although OCD could have a neatness component, most of the time when people say that, it's a joke. And they don't understand that for people who have severe OCD, it can hurt you so bad that there are people who've taken their lives over it. And especially with harm OCD, which is a form of intrusive thoughts that loop. Harm OCD, you can say, watch the news and see a murder. And for months, even, it could play over and over again in your head. And you could think, well, how do I know I wouldn't do that? How do I know? Mom, would I do that? Mom, how do you know I wouldn't do that? How can you be sure? And because you already have an OCD brain, you might start doing rituals like, well, you were touching a curtain when you thought the bad thought. So maybe you go back and you touch the curtain and you think a good thought to replace it. But you get halfway across the floor, halfway across the room, you think the bad thought again. So you go back to the curtain and you touch it again. So your brain starts ritualizing to try and keep you safe. But all that just makes it worse, because it says to the brain, there is a problem or I wouldn't be going back and doing this, right? So you eventually need exposure and response prevention therapy, or ERP, which is the gold standard of treatment for that. And so we wrote a memoir about it. And because we want people to know they're not alone in this, because there's people who think, well, this must be how serial killers get started, or I'm a monster, or there's something wrong with me. And they don't realize it's just a door that's stuck open in your head, and the same thought is slipping through and slipping through. But it has to do often with the brain structure. They've shown MRIs, brain scans of a neurotypical brain and an OCD brain, and it's thinner in some places, thicker in others where it shouldn't be. The actual structure is even different. So there's so much misunderstanding around it, and I just want people to know, oh, honey, you're not a bad person. It's just, it's obsessive compulsive disorder, and it's treatable, and they can get their life back. And so my oldest child, they're 21 now, went in with me and wrote the memoir.
Well, that's sweet. And it must be difficult for like loved ones of people who have, in particular, harm OCD, because like what happens when they do have intrusive thoughts that are too intrusive that day? Like,
yeah, it is. And I had gone through it when I was younger, before I had even heard the term obsessive compulsive disorder. I didn't know what it was. And I came from a very religious background, very deep South, devils and demons, where they would have prayed demons out of me, because that's something they did in our church. Had I said, I'm having looping thoughts that are scaring me, and I explained what kind they were, oh, for sure they would have thought it was the devil. And when Finn, my oldest, started having these looping thoughts, I found them on the bathroom floor. They were dry heaving and saying, something's wrong with me. I'm having these thoughts over and over again. And I was like, oh, sweetie, I know what this is. There's nothing wrong with you. This is a neurological disorder. You are not evil or not broken. This is treatable. You're going to be okay. But it can be tough, because you can go through 2 or 3 therapists, and maybe they don't have the expertise to treat it. Like, they may be a great counselor, but if they're not used to treating OCD with intrusive thoughts, then it might not be that helpful. So it's all about our journey to get the right therapist and everything.
well, that's beautiful that you guys have this story together that you can share and help other people with.
Yeah, and I want to really want to get the word out about that because I absolutely believe people have taken their life over it, not knowing what it was and scared to tell anybody about it because they're afraid that somebody will think that they're evil or maybe they're a murderer. When oh gosh, no, thoughts are not things.
Yeah. I imagine there's a lot of people who just blow it off too, like, oh, everybody goes through things like this. You're just having a bad day, right?
Yeah, I think they do because I think almost anybody has been, say, maybe at a scenic overlook or something,
Yeah.
and they've had a flash of a crazy thought go through their head. Well, I could just walk up behind that person, give them a shove, walk off. No one's here. They'd never know. And they went, where'd that come from? And they went on about their life. They thought, well, I'm not a bad person. So they dismissed it and never thought about it again. And they can do that because they don't have OCD.
Yeah.
But the person whose brain is wired for obsessive compulsive disorder, they have a flash like that everybody has, and they take it as a dire warning. Oh no, you're that person that does stuff like that, and it's on. Maybe for the next 3 years, they're just in this state where sometimes they just want to die. They literally want to die. Finn did. And they're okay with me telling this because they wrote a whole memoir with me about it. So I'm not telling anything that they wouldn't want told. But yeah, and they're a proud queer person as well. And that the OCD can mess with that as well.
Yeah.
Like, what do you know about yourself? And if you're straight, you can get OCD that you might be gay. And if you're gay, you can get OCD. What if I'm not really gay? What if, so it can mess with parts of your life that you wouldn't even think.
What is this book called?
It's called You're Not a Murderer. You Just Have Harm OCD.
Okay. That's a catchy title.
I wanted the title to be something that if some terrified person
Yeah.
who's at the end of their rope and maybe about to take their life because they're so scared, it's typing in Google searches for harm, murderer, maybe even they know enough to type in OCD. I want it to be easy for them to find. And so I thought it would be helpful to name it something very direct.
Mhm.
And my husband helped me come up with that title.
Well, I'm excited for that too now. Thanks. I'm just going to have to buy all of your books forever. So,
Yes, please.
well, thank you so much for joining me today.
Oh, thank you. This has been so fun.
And if anybody out there hasn't read Stealing Aries, I highly suggest it. It's very fun, but also emotional, so emotionally devastating at certain points.
All right.
No, you're not.
Okay, maybe.
It was really good. So I go get it and then pre-order Losing Aries. So, yeah. Have a great day, everybody, and I'll catch you in the next episode. Bye.